Over the past few years, we've seen example after example of college campus protesters seeking to shut down the speech of those with whom they disagree. Things like that have even happened here in North Carolina. A new report from the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, along with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE as it's known, analyzes the status of free speech on North Carolina campuses. Jenna Robinson is president of the Martin Center. She joins us now. Jenna, it's been a while since we've talked with you. Welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here, Donna.
This is not the first time that you have been involved in this type of report.
Right.
This goes back 7 or 8 years, I believe.
Right. We did our first report also with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education in 2010, looking at the majority of colleges or universities rather in North Carolina to see how they rated on free speech. And now we're just revisiting that same question. What kind of progress has been made in the last 8 years?
As we get into that, give us a sense first of your analysis from the 2010 era. How would you describe the state?
In the 2010 report, it was very disappointing is how I would describe it. There were no green light schools in the state. Green light, of course, meaning free of speech restrictions. So there were no schools at which students and faculty could expect, real free speech as guaranteed by the First Amendment. And so that was the most disappointing thing in 2010. But we also found a lot of schools, a very significant number of schools, where there were substantial free speech policies that regulated free speech that made it hard for students to even, hand out a constitution or.
And you're not joking about that.
No,
That's
I am
actually
not
happened.
joking about that. That's a real case. Or restrictions on where students could canvass just to get members for their student organizations. So there were very, very real restrictions in 2010. And so overall, I would say that the 2010 report was a wake-up call for us and I think for others in North Carolina about how bad it really was.
And I know in the ensuing years after that report was released, your organization talked a lot about how this was an issue in North Carolina, and you did a lot of outreach to try to make sure that chancellors, faculty members, students understood what was actually occurring on those campuses. So let's fast forward to the new report. Have we made any progress?
Absolutely. North Carolina is now the nation's leader in protecting free speech on campus. So this is a huge turnaround from 2010. We now have 8 schools in North Carolina with green lights, which is wonderful. 7 of those 8 schools are in our public university system. The only private school on that list is Duke University. And that is a huge improvement. And a lot of schools have gone from red lights to yellow lights, which is some marginal improvement. And I know that with some of these policies, it does get difficult to write them in such a way that you can get to that green light. And so I know that there are schools right now that are still working on changing their policies to get to green light. They do have that goal in mind. So we're in a much better place in North Carolina. We're leading the nation, and I expect to see more progress in the future.
Are there 1 or 2 universities in the state that really are perhaps head and shoulders above others?
I hate to do this because I went to NC State, but UNC Chapel Hill is really the leader on this issue. And NC State is lagging behind. But UNC Chapel Hill was the first the first university in our state to get a green light rating from FIRE. They were also the second school in North Carolina to adopt the Chicago Principles. And the Chicago Principles are a statement saying that they value free speech. They value open inquiry on campus. So it's more than just removing the policies that restrict free speech. It's actually making a commitment to the value of free speech and why it's so important on campus. And so UNC Chapel Hill really is, I think, the one to emulate on this issue.
Jenna, when we talk about free speech on campuses, and I mentioned protesters a few minutes ago, people might have in their mind's eye, well, it's just, protesting and kids will be kids, etc. That's what the college experience is all about. But actually, you look at all sorts of different policies that people may not even realize exist on a college campus. Let's talk a little bit more about that. For example, harassment policies. What is that all about?
Right. So all of the policies that it's actually, so fire does the legal work on this. I have to give them all the credit for doing the legal work. And so they know which policies to look at. So harassment policies obviously have a place on campus. You should not be able to assault people, to stalk people. All of those things are, there are legitimate reasons for having those kinds of policies. But many of our universities have gone way too far, to the point that they have harassment policies in place where if anyone finds a joke slightly off color, then that can be considered harassment. If someone overhears something that was not even directed at them, that can be considered harassment. And I think the biggest problem with it is that some of these policies make the standard for what constitutes harassment entirely subjective. So students and faculty do not know what to expect. And so that's one of the reasons that, harassment is on that list, because it often bleeds into, it's just conversation, it's just speech that universities have reclassified to consider harassment. And so that's why you see something like that on the list.
And taking that issue one step further, there are policies in place that have to do with what's called hate speech. First of all, what is hate speech?
So hate speech legally doesn't have a meaning. All speech in the United States under our First Amendment is treated in the same way, with very, very few restrictions. And so hate speech, according to the people who are proponents of using hate speech as a tool to to shut down speech on campus, would say that it's something that someone finds offensive, normally directed at a protected class of people because of their gender, because of their race, because of their country of origin. But legally, as I said, even really offensive, ugly speech is protected.
Jenna, there's also policies on campuses about where you can do certain things. You mentioned a few minutes ago that the case where someone was passing out literally copies of the Constitution and was told that they were not allowed to do that.
Right, absolutely. So a lot of universities have what are called free speech zones, which means that most of the campus is not open to free speech, and they have carved out a little special section where you are allowed to have free speech. One of the most egregious examples was at UNC Greensboro. They have cleaned up their policy. They don't do this anymore, but it's such a good illustration that I like to still tell it. Their zone for free speech was near a bus stop by the highway. So it wasn't welcoming for students. It wasn't in the quad. It wasn't in the center of campus where students would actually be able to communicate with their peers. It was really this tiny little free speech, ghetto almost, where this is where we put the people who want to speak their minds. We're hiding them away. So it was terrible.
Jenna, we've made a lot of progress, as you noted, but going forward, there are still a number of North Carolina campuses that are red lights and yellow lights, not the green lights that you would want to see. What is the biggest area of concern for you that you would hope to see some reforms going forward?
I would like to see our UNC system campuses, the ones that have not cleaned up their policies, I'd like to see them take action first, and they really are, under the new law here in North Carolina, supposed to do that. And honestly, I expect that they will over the next year. I think we'll see more progress.
It is a fascinating report, and you can find it on the website of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, and that website, Jenna, is what?
Is jamesgmartin.center.